Welcome back. Today's lesson, we're starting into a whole new section. We're going to spend a lot of time on what we call bowl gouge, which I try to remember to call the deep-fluted, because this tool not only is used in bowl turning, but it can be used in spindle work. There's no reason it can't be. Once we call it the bowl gouge, we kind of put it in a category. So what I want to do is show you more about how the tools work, the various kinds of tools, the cuts we can make, and not spend too much time on bowl turning techniques. I know there's many different ways to approach turning a bowl, but I really want to focus today and in the next lesson on the techniques with the tool. And you can find the process for bowl turning that works best for you. So let's go back to the table and begin to take a look at how the bowl gouge, the deep fluted gouge, differs from the shallow fluted gouge that we were using in the earlier lessons. Come back to the table where I want to show you a number of the different bowl gouges or deep fluted gouges. But first, let me talk to you about how they differ from the shallow fluted or what we call spindle gouges. First of all, the handles on these are much longer. So if you stood the two up next to each other, you'd see the shallow fluted gouge for close-in work has a little shorter handle. The other characteristic is this depth of this flute, and the fact that most of these are shaped with a much more mass on either side. Remember that this is called the bevel, the flute, and when we use this tool, most of the cuts I'm going to be making today on the outside of the bowl are going to be made right in this particular area right here. Not on the tip, not way back using this whole wing, but just right off the end of the point. You'll see that better when we start to turn a piece of wood. Let me show you the ones we use here in the classroom. All of the students start out with a gouge that looks much like this. This is what we call a 3/8 gouge. The diameter of the shaft is 3/8 inches. The long handle, a swept back grind, and I'll talk more about that as we go along. We also have another size, which I do not prefer for most of the students. Same looking gouge, but the width of this is wider. This is called a 1/2 inch. The reason I don't prefer this for students who are just beginning with their first bowls is the fact it takes a larger bite and it requires a little bit more strength to manipulate, and it's easier to get too large of a bite that you can't control. So that's the ones we have in the classroom. This is more used by the instructors. The one on top is more used by the students. Let me show you a selection of those that I use at home. These ones I brought from home. They're my most preferred gouges. This one I like. It's a 3/8. I like it because it's double-ended. So when I travel, if this edge gets sharp, I can simply loosen the screws, reverse the tool, and continue to work on the demonstration or class, whatever I'm doing. So I like that because of that. I have a long handle. This has kind of a rubbery feel to the grip, so I can hang on to it very nicely. It's a 3/8 gouge. Here's another. It's called 3/8 gouge, but it actually is physically a little bit smaller. Shorter handle. I at home tend to feel very comfortable with this smaller handled tool, and it's one I use a lot. It also has screws here so I can take these blades out and change it to a different style or different size. For my spindle work, believe it or not, I use a deep fluted gouge for much of my roughing out. I know we talked about the roughing out gouge originally, but you can also do it with your deep fluted gouge. So this tool is made specifically for that spindle kind of work. The handle is triangular, so when I grab it, I know exactly where the flute is because it's lined up with my thumb. I made a custom handle for that. This is one of these interchangeable blades that I use. This is a 1/4 inch, and what I use this for is for either fine cuts or finishing cuts. Sometimes the quality of the surface can be improved on the last cut by using a smaller gouge, sharp, and much more slow approach, and we can get something better to start sanding with. All these gouges I've shown you so far are shaped like this. They're a fairly parabolic shape to the flute. The chips come in and they're easily pitched out. There is an exception. I have two of my gouges here that are round in the center. They tend to cut differently. They're more mass. You can see the bevel on this one I've ground a little bit shorter. And on this one, the bevel is very short, and we call this a bottom feeder. And in the next video, I'll show you how this one gets used to clean up the inside bottom of a bowl where the normal flute just won't fit properly. Let's go back to the lathe and talk about the basic exterior cuts for a bowl. Okay, we're back at the lathe again. Before we get started, I want to kind of give you a little bit of the background of how we've learned to do things most safely at the Diablo Wood Turning Center. First of all, I'm starting off with just a poplar blank. It's easy for us to do the demonstration in. But the other thing I've got it mounted on the faceplate. There are other ways to mount it, other ways that are also successful, but this is the way we do it in class. This is the safest possible way to mount this blank in the very beginning. So it's on a faceplate, screwed onto the lathe, and I'm going to position my tool rest so that I can go right about through the center of the piece. Now for safety purposes, got to do that. I'm still going to keep my safety glasses on, but I'm adding a face shield. The thing about bigger pieces like this is the fact that when something comes wrong and this goes flying or a hunk of it goes flying, this can do damage. Before, in spindle work, we were concerned only about protecting our eyes from flying dust and debris. Now I'm worried about bigger hunks. So for all this presentation and the next one, I'm going to be using a full face shield. There's many different ones on the market. They all are just fine. I am going to wear both. My safety glasses to protect my eyes, my face shield to protect the rest of my head. And so I'm not going to be able to talk to you while I'm turning, so we're going to do this with starts and stops so I can turn and give you some more information as we go along. So first thing I want to do is I want to get this surface flat. And for that, I'm going to take my gouge and I could present it. Remember I talked about this little area right here. I want to get that against the wood. And I'm going to go from the center, squared my tool rest off. I'm simply going to lean back. My cut's going to be like this to get this surface flat. So if I substitute that for a real gouge, I can see where the center is, so I know this tool is going to cut from the center out to the rim. So let me make a couple of facing cuts to get this surface flat. This eventually will be the bottom of the bowl, a tenon will be here, and the shape of the bowl will go this direction here. So let me flatten that off for you real quick. Okay, so we've got the bottom relatively flat. It's good enough because we're now going to do some other work. We could shape this to being perfectly round and then pull our bowl shape into it, but that's a waste of cuts in my opinion. So what I'm going to do is to start working the shape of the bowl while I'm trimming this thing back into round. Now we knocked the corners off on the bandsaw ahead of time to save us some time and some banging. But I want to introduce you to the first of a named cut. And I call this the rule of 45s. I'm going to bring my tool rest out here, and I'm going to set it at 45 degrees across the angle of the lathe. I'm making sure that it runs clear. I'm going to present this tool downward at a 45-degree angle on the tool rest like that. And then the flute is going to be opened up to 45 degrees. By that I mean this is 0, this is 90, there's 45, halfway in between. I'm still cutting right on that sweet spot on the tool, 45 degrees, and what I'm going to do is start cutting around this corner. So the next thing I need to do in preparation, tool handles down, I'm going to bring it into my side, Velcro it down to my pocket, use my left hand to keep it flat on the tool rest. And now I'm working on my feet because I'm going to start to cut here And my first cuts are only going to go about that far, so I want to be sure my left foot is over far enough to hold my balance. So I'm starting with my weight here, rotating around, ending up with my weight over here on the other foot. I can actually feel that difference. My other left, right to left. And my first cuts, literally, I'm just going to be chipping these corners back. So I'm going to approach this thing very slowly, one cut at a time. So let's make a few cuts. I want you to see the full angle back here. That was just a few cuts. But what's happened in the meantime is we started rounding this off. My tool rest now is farther away from the wood because I've taken care of that corner. I can close that up a little bit. Now as I go on this, I'm going to come down farther this way, and I'm going to bring my cuts around farther this way. So the next cut will go a little deeper and come out a little bit farther. So my swings become larger and larger until there's a place where I can't make that all in one cut. So I'm going to come as far as I can comfortably, stop, reset, pick up the cut, and finish that curve around. Doing it in more than one pass is just fine. So I'm going to now finish rounding this off, at least down to where the tendon's going to be. This is going to go into a chuck for the next video, and I'm going to need about that much room on the bottom to shape a tendon. So I'm going to pull my curve from here around to the top. So let's continue to cut the outside of this. This is a good one right here. I'm as far as I can go without falling over. So I've stopped my cut right here. I'm also farther away from the wood because of this tool rest position than I was. So I'm going to stop, move over, bring my tool rest around a little bit farther, check my spin, and now pick up the cut and continue on. Okay, let's do something else. You see the lathe slow down a couple of times? I'm on what's called the high range. This one has multiple ranges. Most even of your mini lathes even have multiple speed ranges. What happens when you're going really fast, you don't have as much torque. If I switch this off to the lower speed range, it also is an increase in the torque rate. So I'm going to stop and change the speed settings on this lathe, going from that which was, I was running around 700 RPM. I want to keep the same RPM, but I want to now do it with more torque. So I'm going to turn the lathe off, open it up, reset the belt to another position, and then come back. So a little short break here while I make a small adjustment on the lathe. I reset the belts on the lathe to the lower speed range, which is a higher torque range. So when I turn the lathe on, without changing anything else, I'm now running only about 300 RPM. So I'm going to increase the motor RPM, and I'm right back about where I was before, but now with much more torque on the machine itself. So let me finish this cut. So I'm going to go from here off to the rim, creating a bowl shape, taking away the rough corners, and then we'll talk about what's next. Now I've reached a point where all the rough corners are knocked off. This is a smooth surface, well, almost, close enough. And so now I can begin to spend more time concerned with the shape I'm trying to achieve. And I spend a lot of time with my eye looking over the top at the floor behind me where I can see good contrast of this shape. So I need to bring this base down more. Yeah, I got a couple of small flats here I've got to take care of, but that'll go away as I begin to pull the rest of this down. And I'm to a place now I can't make this in one cut. I'm going to have to cut some distance, stop, reset, and then finish the cut. So back to work. So, we have a rough shape. Not a really good one, but it's a good start. I've got all the way to the rim. We have a rough bowl shape, but now I need to account for the area that's going to become the tenon, which means I need to take more wood off here to allow a spigot that we'll use in the chuck when we reverse this into the next lesson. So I've got to take some wood off here. I'm not going to make the tenon right now, but I'm going to allow the material needed for it. So I'm going to cut in, create that, and then pull my shape back out again. The other thing I'm thinking about at the same time is what's the bottom of the bowl going to look like? If this is the top, is this going to be the foot that it's going to sit on? Does it need to be smaller than that? So I'm worried about getting this shape roughed in. I need a little bit more wood here for the tenon, but I'm getting close to the right length. I'll get the size approximately right, and we'll fix it in a little while. So all these cuts are being made with that same rule of 45s. Down, rotated, cutting on that sweet spot all the way around. The moment we engage that whole edge, the cut becomes hard to control. The moment we engage the tip, I have a much rougher surface to deal with. The moment I open the tool up like this, I'm open and subject to a catch. So I want to keep it rotated, down, rule of 45s. So let's call that rough. Definitely is rough. So what we want to do, two things now. We want to smooth the surface up a little bit, and we want to define our tenon. And as you saw, I was using the bowl gouge, the deep fluted gouge, to establish the rough dimensions of the tenon. I think this is still a little bit big, and we know from our video on skew use that one of the best ways to get a perfect tenon is to bring out our skew chisel and finish that cut up. So I'm going to take this down just a little bit smaller. I think that's oversized. We need about 2 1/4 inches for the chuck we use. And at this point, I can finish this up with the skew chisel, which is what I'll do in a minute. But you know, this tool is getting hard to use. It's getting hard to use because it's gotten dull. It's gotten dull because I'm cutting wood. All wood's abrasive. Tools are eventually going to all get dull. So I've got 2 choices: switch to another tool or go sharpen. So I think the best thing to do is go sharpen. I'm at the sharpening center, and I'm going to show you 3 different ways of sharpening a bowl gouge. One I use at home. Many of you might be using the same technique, and one we reserve specifically for school, which we think is a little bit more safe. And then a third one for when you go visiting somebody else. So, little mystery here. I do it at home by using the one-way Wolverine and Varigrind system. And the original one looked like this. This angle is set to control the tip. The length of this arm controls the angle on the side of the tool. So this is set up to match mine. So what I do is I put it into the holder, and I set the distance to 2 inches, which happens to be the distance this block is. It's also the distance we have here on the grinders. We've set that up 2 inches up. So now, locked in place, I'm going to sharpen one side. I'm going to sharpen the other side until I like those 2 sides. And then I'm going to make one last pass all the way over. In other words, I'm not spending much time on the center of the tool. The reason is there's not much metal there. Most of the mass is on the left and the right side. Now this length has been set to match my gouge before we started the video. This angle is mine because I brought this from home, so I know this angle is correct. As I said, that's the tip angle. This length establishes the side angle, and I use the magic marker technique to get these angles all set up, so we save some time. So this is me sharpening one of my gouges. Back in here, left side. Right side. And one over the tip. And I'm happy. I'm happy because at home or at our studio here, when we are sharpening, we're not changing the settings. We're leaving things alone. So all we're really doing is dressing the edge, bringing it up to tight home. We're not grinding a lot of metal. If this was reset a lot, then we would be wasting a lot of metal, a lot of tool cost, and a lot of our time in trying to get that angle back again. So this is the way I would do it at home. And many of you would use the same system. We've changed to another system here at school because of this motion here and the concern I had of students maybe coming off the side of the wheel accidentally. So One Way has made a second system, which is a stabilized version of the Varigrind, and I'm going to show that to you next with a different tool. We're now at a different grinder than the one that we have at school for doing specifically the deep fluted gouge. Here's a similar holder, but it sets into a V-slot, and the limitation on the motion side to side is really important for us. So I'm still going to set up the gouge by sticking it in here, setting it to 2 inches, locking it nice and tight. This piece of plastic comes down against the flute and keeps it squared in this angle here. So now this little notch sets in that notch. It rests against the wheel, one side, the other side, and then to pass over. And all the time, this tool has not moved from the center of this particular wheel. So the risk of running off the side of the wheel and getting your hand or the tool into a dangerous place is eliminated. So let me show you sharpening with this fixture. I think we've got it. Okay, sharpening technique number 3. This is a little harder to master. So for beginners and intermediates, I suggest some type of a sharpening fixture that allows you to reposition your tool and get a sharp edge without a lot of wasted metal. But let's just say you have to sharpen a tool that doesn't fit one of those fixtures for some reason. It's too small, too short, or you're not in your shop. You're in a place where someone else's fixture is already preset for their needs. You might want to learn a hand sharpening technique. And what I've done here is set the platform on a grinding wheel to match the angle of the center of the bevel here. And what I'm going to do now is rest the tool on the platform and roll the tool to do the side. Now, what's hard about this one is rolling the tool to do the side and getting that right. And then you got to roll the other direction. It'll take a lot of practice, and I suggest you take an old tool that's pretty well beat up and one that you're willing to work with for a while, because it's going to take you some time. So it looks like this. Flat on the platform. I check the angle and I'm about right. I'm exactly right. Keep it flat. Other side. You may not be able to see that as well as I can. This edge has a perfectly good, sharp cutting surface. And that comes from the practice of being able to do this. There are other ways, but this is a way that needs some practice. So set your platform to the right angle, learn to roll the tool in a nice smooth radius like that. So let's get back to the lathe and finish up the back of our bowl. Back from sharpening. And while we've got the outside shape of this bowl in pretty good shape, there's still some things we want to clean up. First of all, with my fingers I can feel some ridges in here. And that comes from just the process of making these cuts with a round edge against a round surface. So we're going to clean that up. I want to make this as smooth as possible before we go on. So I want to introduce two new cuts. They sound the same, but they are different. The shear cut and the shear scrape. I know we use those terms interchangeably, but I wanted to find a difference for myself. First of all, the cuts we originally were making were like this. We had the handle down at 45, the flute rolled at 45, the tool at 45, and we were making cuts on the bevel right at this dark spot. The surface of the wood to the edge is about 45 degrees, so we're making some nice cuts coming around here. I'm going to turn the tool over and I'm going to cut on the other side. This is not a beginner's cut. And we're going to start by laying the tool really wide open like this and rolling it until we start getting a cut. The angle that the edge to the wood is presenting here is much, much more acute, and it's a cleaner, finer cut. And I'm going to be able to ride that tool up around here and take out many of those ridges. That's a shear cut, shearing across the fibers at a very acute angle. The other cut I'm going to show you after that is what's called a shear scrape. Fine for cleaning up very small spots, in which case I'm going to turn the tool totally upside down use this edge against the wood like this. And it's good for doing a lot of small cleanups. It's a very, very obtuse angle, but since you'll see shavings coming off, we still are actually cutting. So this to me is a shear cut. This is a shear scrape. So I'm going to do the shear cut to clean the surface up first. And I'll show you how that works. I'm going to lay the tool here, roll it open, not any farther than when the cut starts. Any farther I could move into being too powerful of a cut, a catch in other words. And we'll follow that all the way around, and then I'll stop and we'll reset for the scrape for cleaning up little tiny spots. Okay. It's my gouge we just sharpened. Lathe is still set at approximately 1700 RPM. Tool rest still stays in about the same position. And I'm going to start here, roll the tool open, and come around like this. That was one pass, and that's kind of unusual. I'm able to get all the way around. Generally, there's little spots I can't reach because it's too much of a movement for my body for the curve. Now, those grooves and ridges that were there before pretty much are all gone. There's still a bump. I can see it right there and right here. In other words, there's a low spot in between. I actually can feel it with my fingers. So I'm going to use the other cut, a shear scrape, get rid of some of this stuff. And I'm going to use this bottom edge of the tool. The handle's going to be very low like this. The problem is, with most beginning students, is instead of doing this, they'll come over and do it like this. This is scraping all right, but I don't have the shearing action that I get with keeping the handle low. The difficulty is coming around here trying to figure out where to hold the handle. I might actually have to turn the handle around, do this bottom portion like this. I know that's against the grain, but it's a cleanup cut. I'm going to do it. So shear, scraping. There's my low spot, high, high. I can see them. I could actually take a pencil and mark them if I needed to, but I don't. So I'm going to work here and make this low spot, this high spot, excuse me, go away. Handle's low. I didn't get much off of there, but I didn't need much off of there. That spot, high spot, is gone. Now there's another high spot right here, and I need to take care of it next. No room, can't get my handle around far enough, so I'm going to switch to the other hand and do the cut this direction. I don't know if you can see it or not. I'm getting shavings. Not big ones, but enough. And because the tool is resting against the wood the way it is, I can spend all of my time looking back here at the surface that's being cut rather than watching my tool. The trick is keep that handle low, keep the tool at about a 45 degree to the surface if I can. Is it cutting? You betcha it's cutting. Those are shavings. So we've got the outside of this bowl pretty well shaped. I perfected the tenon. I'll show you how to do that later in the skew chisel part 2 video. And we're ready to flip this around and cut out the inside. Different set of cuts. So for part 2 of the bowl gouge video, we're going to go inside, and I'm going to show you another set of cuts using the same tool. See you in the next lesson.